From Adesanya's claims of him rejoining the promotion to the great fighter securing a lifetime's deal, is Francis Ngannou really coming back to the UFC? Hold your horses and unclench your fists because that is not happening. Still, Israel Adesanya has other ideas. The last stylebender thinks a miraculous reunion can happen. Talk about having your head up in the clouds. Here's the thing. Ngannou ended his UFC contract on extremely bad terms with the UFC. So for Adesanya to even suggest he'd go back to that promotion is low-key insane. He believes that the Predator will make his way back to the company. Since he's yet to book a fight ever since his dramatic exit, many people are second-guessing whether he made the right decision. But the 33-year-old isn't giving up on Ngannou just yet. He said, "I'm proud of him because his story is very unique. From before the UFC, he's paving his way, signed with the PFL. The story's not over yet. He thinks everyone needs to chill and watch him work his magic." He did admit that he didn't like how ONE FC tried to cut themselves from the 36-year-old, and that they were only withdrawing from the deal to try to save face, since Francis was honest with them about what was going on. But although most of his fans have that opinion, he couldn't be more wrong about the UFC and Ngannou eventually coming to terms. After all that went down between the two, it's safe to say that ship's already sailed. But knowing all that, Adesanya believes it can still happen. He said that Francis isn't just a guy who quits, and even though the president, Dana White, claimed they'd never take him in again, he's made that claim plenty of times before. He used to say that women would never fight in the UFC, but look at where they're now. The women's division has just as much clout as the males, and that's exactly what's going to happen with Francis. Only this time, he'll be welcomed with open arms. They're going to pay him what he deserves. And the UFC is going to make up for all those times they've messed with him. I mean, I don't know if this guy is still on a high from his win against Alex Pereira, but those are some wild hopes to have. I don't blame him, though. Ngannou's no joke. The guy's responsible for a huge chunk of clout the UFC received. He's also one of the best heavyweights in the world, and is a living money-making machine for whichever promotion he works with. No wonder everyone scrambled to get a hold of him as soon as he quit the UFC. He was, and will always be, one of the biggest names White will ever work with. So you know he went home and shed some tears after the 36-year-old put his foot down on his rules. In short, the Predator's hot stuff and has always been in high demand, especially because he's one of the strongest punchers in UFC history. He holds the world record for the strongest punch, and White even said that his punches are equivalent to 96 horsepower. So getting hit was like being slammed by a Ford Escort going full speed. I feel bad for his opponents. Who'd want to go up against that? Now that you know why Ngannou's the ultimate G, the MMA community was right to absolutely lose their minds when he dropped the news. Everyone was shook, and fans were coming up with all kinds of theories to explain this sudden bombshell. Having built up a reputation for being one of the scariest fighters to step into the ring, and with huge fights lined up, why'd he suddenly throw all that away? He already had a 3-fight contract in mind moving forward, before returning to boxing. Besides that, he was in the middle of discussions for high-end fights, with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. Well, my guy had a solid reason for stepping outside the comfort of the UFC, guaranteed fights and all. He had a conflict of interest with White. And after everyone went into a frenzy trying to figure out what happened, the former champion posted a video on YouTube to clear up the air, and also addressed White's comments about his exit. As it turns out, the promotion's strict contracts and rigid rules were too much for him. He felt suffocated and was done putting up with it. According to Ngannou, he put forward some terms for the Las Vegas-based promotion, but none of them were met, like the right of a sponsorship, health insurance, or a fighter advocate. There was no flexibility, and he was denied everything he asked for. The promotion wasn't even letting him navigate his career the way he wanted to, and had complete control over him with their contract. Talk about being toxic. He clearly was fed up, because according to Dana, even an offer that would have made him the highest-earning heavyweight fighter in UFC history couldn't make him stay. But it just shows how tired he was with the promotion's restrictions. Ngannou was such a big deal in the UFC that his absence has left a gaping hole in the title of the champion. You can feel his absence. UFC commentator Joe Rogan even said that his exit will lead to UFC fans being deprived of some of the best top heavyweight fights. That's called impact. But things only went south from here. Despite talking highly about Ngannou before, White chucked his previous views about the Predator and decided to drag him after his exit. He claimed that Ngannou was getting old and was trying to avoid taking any further risks, and that he was afraid of fighting against Jon Jones. This backfired on White pretty bad, though. I mean, it's Ngannou we're talking about. And the last thing he has to prove to anyone, actually, is why he's one of the best UFC fighters to date. It's pretty clear Dana's still pretty salty about the whole situation. I mean, his champion literally chose to walk away from the promotion instead of accepting the offer of a lifetime. That probably doesn't happen very often for him. Now, after getting over his contract extermination, you'd think the two would have settled their differences and called it a day, right? Hell no. White's still not done disrespecting the former champion, and even stated that Ngannou was impossible to deal with, and that he would never be welcomed into the UFC again. That sounds like fan behavior to me. So now that you know Dana's not getting over it anytime soon, Adesanya's statements seem even more unlikely, especially after this amazing deal Ngannou secured with the PFL. The company's just bagged one of the best fighters they'll ever get their hands on. But it's no surprise, because as soon as the fighter's departure from the UFC was confirmed, everyone knew whichever promotion successfully coaxed him into their ranks would make a steal. The Cameroonian has officially signed with the PFL in a one-of-a-kind deal. It allows him to compete in MMA and pursue boxing at the same time, something he wasn't allowed to do in the UFC. What's more, the deal also made him a minority equity owner, a member of the PFL Advisory Board, and the chairman of PFL Africa. He had all of his demands met. Meanwhile, he had to struggle in the UFC because they had complete control over his career. The 36-year-old has bagged a contract that is unlike any seen in MMA history. But it makes sense because this guy is the highest paid heavyweight ever, and so any promotion, apart from the UFC, wouldn't think twice about taking him under their wing. But here hops in the president again. Speaking from his experience working with the Predator, White says he sees no logic behind the deal, and that the 36-year-old still wants to take zero risks. He also said that he knew this would happen the day he was released from the UFC. But now that Ngannou is moving on from his previous promotion, he didn't take kindly to his former boss's comments. He was pissed and asked him what his deal was. His role in the UFC is done and over, so it's high time for White to back off. After being offered this game-changing deal, who'd want to stay in the UFC? The fighter was miserable in that promotion, and since this deal ticks off pretty much all of his boxes, despite what Adesanya suggests, going back to his old company isn't even an option now. As for what's in store for Ngannou in the future, the greatest knockout artist in UFC history is set to make his PFL debut in the superfight division next year and plans to compete in boxing in 2023. While talking to MMA Fighting, he explained that what he has with the PFL is a strategic partnership and is all set to make his PFL debut in 2024 with some potential opponents in mind. He did mention Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, and Deontay Wilder as his dream opponents, but things are yet to move further with the three. So, from him securing the deal of a lifetime to Adesanya claiming the Predator will rejoin the promotion, that's all about whether Francis Ngannou is really coming back to the UFC.